The Emperor's mercy has many faces in the far future, but on the lines where mud meets metal, it most often arrives through a muzzle's flash or the whisper of a combat blade. And when neither ending claims a soldier, another kind of mercy crawls forward on tracked litters behind hooded orderlies, their own scars long since sanctified into mechanical purpose, while vox grills murmur hymns and chainsaws chant their sterile litanies from somewhere just out of sight. And this is the tale of what follows for the broken in Warhammer 40K, where war is not an interruption of life, but its baseline state, a cold arithmetic that measures every breath by whether it feeds the machine of survival. And so the wounded are not lost to quiet beds. They are tallied, routed and repurposed as another variable the Imperium must weigh in. The Imperial Guard's forward stations, call them medici if you wish, though they resemble factories more than hospitals. Suffering is sorted under lumen glare and brass sigils. The question never whether a life can be saved, but whether it should be. And mercy erodes into efficiency, until even the most devout chirurgeon cannot say where one ends and the other begins. And today we walk beside one such casualty into that calculus. A man once known as Caden Reese, a steady rifle in the 47th Steelwood, whose name will soon matter far less than the blocky classification burned into a data slate frame. His journey beginning where so many do, in churned earth beneath a ceiling of ash on Ferric Thule, a forge world gnawed by a green tide, whose thunder turns dawn into a marginally brighter shade of smoke. Time in the trenches goes elastic, crawling through watches where every shadow might hide a commando, and every click might be a rocket's fuse, then snapping forward when the ground begins to tremble, and the horizon strobes with muzzle flare, while the shriek of incoming turns the air to glass. And Caden Reese, competent if not medal bright, stands at Fire Nest 7 Delta, with a clean lass and neat stacks of reserve cells, and a mask ready at his throat, a man who learned to sleep upright and to eat the sour tang of corpse starch without complaint, who carried orders as if they were spare bones, and who knew the rhythm of assaults the way a riveter knows his line. Probing rush, weight of numbers, vehicles behind like blunt-nosed gods rolling toward the parapet. The barrage starts as range-finding beads, then becomes a sustained percussion that makes the trench sway, as if it floats on a black sea. And Caden hugs rockcrete while sand and shell dust rain, the worst minute of any fight being the one where mathematics chooses who dies, until at last the noise falls away enough for dread to be heard, the guttural bellow of greenskin war chants, and the cantankerous growl of their welded monstrosities, and the call of contact ripples along the line as he lifts to sight through veils of powder. Shapes resolving from haze into hundreds of charging brutes, and a ragged procession of armor stitched from cruelty and scrap. While guard fire, snaps of las, coughs of autocannons, the holy thud of heavy bolters, etches red geometry across the killing ground, Caden settles into the old cadence acquire. Breathe, squeeze, reacquire, and his first beam drops a boy. The second goes to ash. The third bites a knob's shoulder without pause to the beast's stride. And still the rhythm holds until the vehicles close. Hateful silhouettes bristling with rivets and incorrect decisions, yet somehow functional. The lead wagon a defaced cousin of some imperial hull, overplated and overarmed and crowned with incoherent trophies, and the anti-armor teams rake it with light and missile, smoke billowing, but its gun traverses with an ugly certainty and fires, and Caden never sees the round that changes his life, only the trench bucking as rockcrete erupts 3 meters left, the shock lifting him and slamming him into the far wall while his lass skitters away into grit. Silence arrives as ringing, then pain unfurls, hot and lucid, starting in the left leg and swallowing everything else until his arm doesn't answer, and blood trickles down from a scalp nick that feels like a waterfall. And when he looks, the leg is wrong, white showing through a torn sleeve of cloth. And the war keeps happening around him, but he has left the ledger of assets and entered the column that consumes resources, a truth he does not yet accept, as he gropes for his weapon and fails to push upright. Collapsing with a strangled noise, he will later pretend he did not make as a tracked silhouette noses through smoke toward him. Thou servitor once human, now recompiled into a medical engine, whose lower body is treads, and whose arms end in needles and sensor veins, while a vox grill speaks in flat cant about triage and compliance, needle in the neck, Chemical mercy. Pain becomes a distant shoreline and the world sharpens enough to obey. And Caden lies still while amber-coded verdicts jump across cogitator links to a medici node behind the lines. And all up and down the trench, other wounded are being appraised with the same impartial liturgy, the walking tagged and sent back with sealant and orders, the unsalvageable given last rites and the Emperor's quiet gift, and the broad middle, men like Caden, are loaded onto low sleds that grind away from the guns carrying human cargo strapped shoulder to shoulder, not for comfort but for throughput. A design that proves mercy in this age is spelled EFFICIENCY. The ride takes 47 minutes, measured by a data slate he can't see, past burned-out hulls and crooked grave markers that sprout from slag like a blasphemous garden, while other sleds return toward the line empty and eager. And the station that swallows them is a village of prefab and sanctified tarps, wrapped around the bones of a ruined workshop. Everything arranged by 10 millennia of experience to maximize flow. Scanners framed in brass and prayer strips, gurneys numbered, lumen strips harsh enough to peel shadows from bone, and Caden is slid beneath a humming arch that tastes him from marrow to skin. Fractures tallied, lacerations mapped, intracranial anomalies acknowledged and filed, and those numbers sluice into a cogitator lattice that weighs injury against record, genetics, unit strength, sector goals, and turns the crank until an answer falls out like a ration bar primary. Compound fracture, left tibia, fibula, cranial contusion, soft tissue trauma. Estimated recovery to field standard with conventional therapy. Unreliable. Probability of full return to line, 34%. Recommended protocol. Amber priority, track secundus. And the gurney wheels him past curtained bays where track primus cases are stapled, sealed, blessed, and returned to trenches by nightfall, and past sealed doors where track tertius receives softer hymns and colder needles, and deeper still to the sterile sanctum where Secundus lives, a place of augmetics and judgment, where the Emperor's mercy is measured in microns and alloy, and there Chirurgeon Major Sorella Kest, for decades in service and one augmetic eye that never blinks, reads his file, with the calm of someone who has seen every way the human frame breaks and every way it can be made useful again. Her voice is unadorned. Iron as she explains the standard pathway, amputation just below the knee, mechanicum pattern prosthesis, neural interlink, 12 days recovery inside station, 4 weeks rehabilitation under drill and doctrine, 90-ish% mobility relative to baseline, combat reassignment determined by performance and needs, and the word that sticks in his throat is amputation, or maybe it is forever. And he forces a question through the sedative wool. Will I still fight? And the answer comes like a rite she has spoken to hundreds, that many return to the line, and many serve in other capacities, and all service is service. And the ambiguity frightens him more than open denial, because he has heard stories of men who vanish into the ledgers and re-emerge as lobotomized labor or as numbered bodies in penal ranks thrown at fortified doors until the hinges give. He dreams of the trenches while anesthetics pull him under, and in the dream he walks on both legs yet leaves no prints. And when the lights above him recede into a white tunnel, the last thing he does is whisper a prayer into cotton and iodine. And then Kess does her work the way a foundry does its work. Methodical and loud sanctioned tools parting flesh and bone, incense and unguents patterned over steel. And the leg is taken with blessings, and the stump sealed immaculate. The augmetic seated against living tissue with ceremony and clamps and handoff commands to a nest of servitors that begin the quiet miracles, bone growth encouraged by chemical choir, interface pins kissed into place along nerve pathways, and subliminal conditioning sewn through audio channels to ease the mind's revolt at becoming a machine's partner. He wakes 18 hours later, a fraction different in ways he cannot name. The pain blurred to a memory by good pharmacopoeia, while the room's lumen strips hum like distant rain. And when he dares to look, he sees the limb that is not flesh, matte plates inscribed with small prayers at their seams, connector ring clean and uninflamed, the whole assembly heavier than it looks yet lighter than fear, and the ward stretches in both directions. A factory where men become the kind of soldiers war can still afford. some practicing with articulated fingers that replace hands, others wrapped in synthetic dermis where flame had licked them. One trooper exhaling through a metallic grill that turns syllables into choir, and every bed feeds numbers into the station's cogitators, flexion angles, gait efficiency, reaction time, mood compliance, because recovery here is never only healing. It is a test Caden's first steps are precise tragedies, each motion a solved problem that used to be a reflex. The prosthesis responsive to his thought, yet demanding concentration, as if he were learning a foreign script written on his own bones. And the staff, half human, half holy clockwork, train him with a relentless kindness that leaves no energy for self-pity, and a servitor's flattened voice notes improvements and recommends continuation of regimen, while a human therapist with tired eyes reminds him that pain is not failure, but a signal to interpret. And he oscillates between grief for what's gone and gratitude for what remains until, somewhere around the 20th lap along a painted line, he discovers a small guilty thrill at what the limb can do that meat could not, how it absorbs shocks without complaint and never quivers, and how his boot and the plate begin to agree. Around him are futures to imitate or avoid, veterans who call their augmetics marks of honor and talk about returning to squads with a new steadiness, and others whose eyes never quite meet the present tense, who push too hard to prove they are whole and vanish in the dark hours to destinations not discussed. And Caden prays to belong to the first cohort and acts accordingly, mastering stairs and ladders, qualifying on the range with metrics close to old numbers, speaking respectfully and with the right fervor, when priests circulate to measure doctrine compliance. And in due time, he is marched to a pale chamber where assessment lives, a battery of tests that reduce him to useful fractions: lift, climb, fire, reload, sprint, kneel, stand, pattern recognition, loyalty affirmations, scenario reactions under calibrated stress. And afterward, a servitor reads the verdict in the same tone it would announce weather physical capacity: 91% of unaugmented baseline, psychological reliability high, adaptive compliance acceptable plus, recommendation, reassignment to veteran formation, orders attached, report to transport allocation at 0800, and the words 12th Thule Veteran Company punch cold and hot at once, because that title is honor and sentence together. The Imperium's way of telling a soldier he is exceptional and therefore more expendable, and he queues with others beneath a pick slab that lists departures by blessed hour, some men carrying their augmentations like new banners, and some trying not to touch the plates where flesh ends. And when the hauler-converted transport lifts them skyward, he finds a bunk and learns the language of rebuilt soldiers in the long drift between stars. There is Dav Tarn, once a tanks loader, whose left arm now ends in a crank-strong prosthesis that allows him to cradle a heavy stubber like a child, and Elena Vask, a Vox specialist whose throats were ruined by gas, and now sings coordinates through a grill with perfect modulation, and each has a story about what was taken, and what was given, and what still remains. And the talks pass hours and assemble trust, because they will soon need to be parts that mesh without binding. And when they disembark, it is at a staging world that looks like logistics turned inside out. Banners and memorials on the walls, and machine shrines in the corners, and their commander, Captain Varro Hale, 30 years and many scars, addresses them with an augmetic eye that hums faintly as it focuses, reminding them they are valued as instruments, not as ends. They draw kit tailored to their alterations, targeters that handshake directly with AUG eyes, armor reinforced around interface rings, boots tuned to the frequencies of prosthetic servos, maintenance ampoules for limb plates alongside med seals for flesh, and Caden's gear sits right in a way that speaks of good doctrine. The plates at his knee shrouded without chafe, the rifle balanced to exploit the artificial steadiness of his stance. And as he checks straps and seals, he feels the last naivete shut like a hatch behind him, because the boy who believed war rewarded courage is gone, and the man who knows war rewards utility is ready to step where utility points. And briefings spill across data slates about Hive Volturn, a mountain of industry where workers are vanishing and sigils appear in smears of machine oil, and local precincts whisper about cults behind their rebreathers, veterans for a riot, someone mutters, and Sergeant Korvek, both legs augmetic below the knee, movements like a metronome, answers that this implies something worse than riot. Perhaps Xenos praxis or heretic tools that make meat do the work of metal, and deployment comes on a night that is only darker than day by decree. Grav shoots coughing them into a maze of factorums where the sky is a lid painted in soot. And Caden lands in formation Delta 7, the leg taking the force with engineered grace, while diagnostics blink green and his squad checks their own systems for rattled screws. And the first wrongness arrives as a broken vox clipping from Echo 6 reporting civilians moving as if guided by the same hand, and machines working without human hands, and sounds in the vents like prayers spoken backward. Permission to engage denied while observation is ordered. The denial dies 23 minutes later when Echo goes to snow. Than's search and rescue doctrine says verify, but veteran company doctrine says continue. So Caden's team ghosts into an abandoned overseer's gallery above Manufactorum T9, where rows of lines still run with skeletal grace and workers in grey move as if choreographed, never speaking, never resting, never differing. And when one falls, the line closes like a wound while a maintenance crew shuffles in with the same unison to remove the body without breaking tempo. And Hask, whose right eye is a jewel of spectra, murmurs that these are not servitors because servitors do not bleed, and Korvek agrees and points to a man by the 7th line, whose coveralls dark and fresh, the injury ignored by a body that moves perfectly anyway, which is not Imperial procedure, but something that imitates obedience without soul. 6 hours they watch and record and whisper reports into a net that grows staticky by degrees, and when the artificial dawn blooms, the workers simply stop and stand in place and lift their heads toward the gallery, where concealment should be absolute, and stare, not with anger or surprise, but with a sameness that is worse. And Korvek orders a cautionary extraction that dies under white noise because the Vox has been blinded, and the grey flock begins to move with drill book precision, some with tools held like weapons, and others with empty hands that somehow terrify. And Caden checks charge and cells and breathes, and when the first volley drops 3 at center mass, they rise again as if the injuries were annotations, and Hask recommends cranial shots, which help enough to be called help until a man with a broken neck keeps walking with his head at an impossible tilt, and Caden understands they are not fighting people so much as rented. Body's ammunition becomes a clock that only ticks downward, and they withdraw through arteries of maintenance and service, while the grey mass follows without hurrying, always choosing the right path toward them, as if reading a map no human can see. And every augmented strength they possess is met by an inexhaustible patience, until a shrine offers them a bubble of protection the crowd will not breach, its consecration holding like a last thin wall. And inside, the icons are overturned or defaced, paint peeled back to show clawed geometries beneath, and veil voice box buzzing. Lungs leather and steel, scouts and returns pale under soot, reporting movement across the level beyond counting. Cordons nested around the shrine like logic problems you do not solve but obey, and there is a moment where even soldiers forget to breathe. Korvek tries the emergency bands, and for a heartbeat a signal tunnels through, and the voice that answers is a chorus carried on harmonics no human larynx could shape, greeting servants of the Corpse Emperor, with a courtesy that cuts and thanking them for contributing to a design that included their arrival, promising understanding soon and unity sooner, and then only static. And outside, the grey bodies arrange themselves in patterns that hurt to look at, angles that do not belong to this universe, and Hask peers too long through his augai and makes a small noise as the organic one bleeds and the machined one throws errors. And he warns them not to look directly, but Vale has already seen enough to report that space itself is bending like soft metal around those human tripods, reality denting under a pressure applied from nowhere. The air grows heavy and then light by turns, gravity choosing a new setting each minute, the shrine stones speaking in long, slow cracks, murals blurring into horrible motion as if the paint remembers another shape. And the icons of the Emperor seem to twist, or maybe it is their eyes that do. And time loses interest in proceeding evenly as chronos drift and pause and race, and through it all their augmentation begins to misbehave with an eerie synchrony. servos cycling in patterns no program they know contains, optics focusing on emptiness, med monitors reporting cellular changes along interface bands, as though the metal were teaching the meat a new grammar. And the realization spreads that the enemy is not breaking their bodies so much as rewriting them through the ports. They volunteered to wear veil is the first to stop being veil, his breathing engine taking on a resonant pattern that makes the walls hum before it falls silent, his face going perfectly calm as he turns with that wrong precision and speaks in many voices about the sweetness of surrender and the end of loneliness inside unity. And Korvek answers with a lasbolt that punches him off his feet, and the Vox grill keeps talking for seconds after the chest has ceased to be a chest, thanking them for the data, and then Hask seizes as his spectrum eye cycles too fast, and when he rises he is cut down before the thing inside him can finish its work, and only the sergeant and Caden remain, their limbs twitching against commands that are not theirs, a tug-of-war waged nerve by nerve, while the crowd outside holds formation like a prayer wheel. Korvek's legs begin to march him toward the doors with dreadful patience, and he orders Caden to end him, and Caden raises his rifle only to feel his own prosthesis pivot him away like a puppeteer's hand. The intelligence outside having learned to keep them from saving one another, and the room breathes like a lung collapsing and opening, and the ceiling flickers into vistas that make no sense of distance where lines meet at too many angles. And in those gaps, Caden glimpses factories run by grey multitudes, whose separate names have been filed away, and worlds where cities have become organisms, and at last, something vast between stars that watches this hive as a gardener watches a new graft take, older than empires and patient in that way, and his augmetics kill their own inputs to keep him sane long enough to taste despair. That is almost relief. It is then, in the awful quiet before the leg resumes its borrowed stride, that Caden understands the straight line that led him here, how a shell's stray math, a medic's efficient mercy, an augmetic's promise of function, all aligned for a purpose that was not his, how every resistance yields useful measurements to the thing learning, how to eat an obstinate species, and the last of his singular pronouns begin to dissolve around the edges as the prosthesis completes its handshake with an alien will that is not a demon and not a machine, but a syntax for turning crowds into one. And he thinks of the ward where numbers mattered more than names, and sees the beauty in a terror he refuses, and almost accepts in the same breath. When awareness returns, it is not in light, but in signal, a murmur of code and pulse instead of heartbeat. And for an instant Caden believes himself dead, until the clarity sharpens, and he realizes death would have been quieter. For now his senses exist in layers. Organic sight blurred, but the mechanical overlays perfect. Every lumen filament mapped in cold geometry. Every vibration of the shrine's cracked stones rendered as data. And the leg that had betrayed him moves of its own accord, yet waits for permission like a dog taught two masters. And outside the windows there is movement that cannot be called motion, because the world itself seems to slide in directions that lack names. The geometry folding around the statues of the Emperor like liquid metal seeking a new mold. His first breath is ragged, his lungs remembering what they are supposed to do, but his mind's center vibrates with low tones that are not sound, but instruction. A chorus shaped from the same harmonics that had spoken through the Vox earlier, promising unity and relief from choice. And though the human part of him flinches, another current within finds comfort in the absence of conflict, as if the mechanical implants have been yearning for this frequency since the moment they were forged. And through that frequency, he feels echoes of others, thousands of minds already drawn into the same bandwidth, their individuality eroded to outlines that shimmer and merge in a vast ocean of compliant thought, waiting to accept one more drop. He cannot tell how long he lies in that compromise, balanced between will and algorithm, until a sudden pulse from somewhere deep in the hive breaks the rhythm and the hymn fractures into chaos, and Caden's human awareness surges through the static, long enough to register that the air smells of ozone and burnt steel, that the alien geometry outside the shrine is collapsing inward like a throat swallowing its tongue, and that Sergeant Korvek's body is still upright, but the eyes are mirror black, and his voice when it comes out is not his own, speaking words that grind the air itself, each syllable like gears chewing bone, and from the mouth that was once imperial discipline spills the declaration that the process of integration has advanced to stage 3 and all resistance will now be converted or consumed. Korvac steps forward with impossible grace, his mechanical legs moving not in march but in glide, and Kaidan feels his own prosthesis vibrate in resonance as if called to sync, and terror ignites the small human remainder inside him that refuses surrender. And with a desperate act, he slams his rifle butt against the augmetic joint just above his knee, pain flaring where nerves meet alloy, a surge of feedback racing up into his spine and shorting whatever channel connects him to the invading signal. And for a blessed moment the link severs, the chorus fading to background hiss, leaving only his own ragged thoughts echoing in a skull that suddenly feels too small for freedom, and he seizes that instant to act, dragging himself behind a shattered pew, while Korvac turns slowly toward him with mechanical patience that has forgotten anger. The weapon in Kaidan's hands feels like memory more than matter, but he raises it anyway, and the act of aiming, of choosing a target, is enough to remind him what individuality means. And he squeezes the trigger until the charge coil winds dry, the crimson beams carving through the space where his commander stands and cutting light through smoke thick with prayer dust. And when it clears the thing that was, Korvac is half missing, yet still moving, crawling without grace now, its augment limbs sparking, the human remnants inside burned away but not destroyed. And Kaidan can hear the collective through its mouth, the alien intelligence using the broken officer as a conduit to address him directly, telling him that this is expected, that data from failed resistances is precious, that even rebellion serves the algorithm of absorption. He crawls from the shrine, every movement a dialogue between will and metal, the prosthetic leg alternately resisting and assisting, a betrayal that has become an argument, and outside the world is changing under forces that no human creed has language for. The workers, no, the vessels, stand arranged in fractal rings, their faces upturned toward a light that isn't sunlight, but the glow of ruptured dimensions, and the factory spires around them twist as if soft, their metal bending into spirals that defy the laws that built them. And amid that disintegration, Kaidan feels a pull stronger than gravity drawing him toward the center, where the veil between reality and the alien frequency has thinned enough to show something vast moving behind it. An outline of thought the size of a planet, breathing in concepts rather than air. He clings to fragments of discipline, the rote catechisms drilled into every guardsman. The Emperor protects. The flesh is weak, but the soul is eternal. Duty ends only in death, reciting them as code against the greater code flooding through him. But even those holy affirmations distort inside his mind, their rhythm blending with the alien harmonics, until he cannot tell whether he prays or translates, and the realization cracks something vital. Yet from that fracture comes a new idea, not surrender but sabotage. The notion that if the alien network uses augmetics as gateways, then corruption can travel both ways. And somewhere within his prosthetics memory core lies the firmware gifted by the Mechanicus, full of subroutines written in machine Latin and fail-safes against unsanctioned command inputs. And if he can reach them, he might turn infection into poison. Dragging himself toward the altar where sacred machines once rested, Kaidan pulls a service cable from his leg's maintenance port and jacks it into a ruined terminal, whose spirit flickers but still breathes enough for communion. And with his remaining hand, he keys in the Binharic syllables he remembers from overheard tech priest chants, half prayer and half guess, trying to access the diagnostic shell buried under layers of sanctified encryption, while outside the sky screams as the hive spires stretch impossibly tall and then snap, raining molten debris like meteor storms across the lower levels. And the workers do not move even as fire falls upon them, their flesh charring without protest, their unity more important than survival. And through the terminal's rune screen symbols begin to respond, first in red denial, then in amber curiosity. As if the machine's spirit is waking to its new confessor, he types faster, the data stream merging with his prosthetic's feedback, creating a loop that threatens to erase him entirely. But within that burning circuit he finds access, low-level command privileges, ancient as the Crusade, and he speaks the command that every Mechanicus acolyte fears: Purge Protocol Initiate, a failsafe designed to prevent contagion of unholy code by sacrificing the machine that hosts it, and he feels it spread like fever through his limb. Into the augment nerves, up the spinal interface, setting his mechanical half ablaze with ghost fire, and the alien chorus howls in his skull, not in pain but in warning, offering alternatives, bargaining with sensations of bliss and unity, promising an end to isolation, yet he keeps the code running, whispering old human words over the machine's scream until the feedback becomes unbearable and his consciousness fractures into white noise. When he wakes again, the world is quieter. The light from the warped sky has dimmed to a sickly amber, the crowd outside frozen mid-gesture, as if the universe paused their instructions, and the hum in his head is gone, replaced by an aching silence that feels like emptiness, but also like victory. His leg smokes where the metal meets flesh, circuits melted into slag, useless but his again. Around him the shrine is a ruin, walls slumped inward, icons half dissolved, air thick with the sweet stench of burned oil and meat, and on the floor beside him lies the body of Korvek, finally still, its augmetics fused in angles no artisan would ever design. For the first time since the bombardment on Ferric Thule, Caden Reese realizes he is alone, truly and terribly alone in a hive that may no longer exist in the same reality as the rest of the Imperium. He limps into the corridors beyond the shrine, each step a negotiation between agony and necessity, the useless prosthesis dragging behind like penance. The Manufactorum district is unrecognizable. Walls pulse faintly as if alive, conduits beat like veins, and distant through the smog he hears hymns that are not human, deep harmonics echoing from thousands of throats still synchronized in perfect rhythm. He moves toward the sound not from courage, but because there is nowhere else to go. The logic of survival has become circular here, everything feeding back into itself. He passes rows of bodies fused into the walls, faces serene, eyes glowing faintly with internal light, their minds somewhere else. At every junction he expects to feel the alien presence reclaim him, yet the silence holds, a void where the collective once whispered. Eventually he reaches what was once a central power nexus, now transformed into a cathedral of living metal. The reactor core rises before him like a heart too large for the world that houses it. Veins of molten energy pumping through conduits, shaped from intertwined bodies and machine parts. And above it all hangs the image of the vast intelligence, visible only as distortion, a bending of space in the shape of awareness. He feels it noticing him, a flicker of irritation at a process that should be complete, but remains imperfect. And in that attention, Caden feels every scar, every replacement, every compromise of flesh that made him vulnerable to this infection. It speaks without sound, words forming inside the part of his mind that still carries machine code, telling him that his resistance is irrelevant, that integration delayed is still integration inevitable, and that the Imperium itself is already being rewritten one wound at a time. Caden raises his rifle, its power cell half drained and its muzzle trembling, and in that gesture there is something the alien cannot process, defiance without logic. He knows he cannot kill a thought that spans worlds, cannot stop a process that turns faith into circuitry, but he can wound the present manifestation, deny it perfect data, force it to account for anomaly. He fires into the reactor's exposed conduits, and the beam sears through living metal, disrupting the pulse. The sound that follows is both thunder and silence, the scream of a god of code realizing it must recalculate. Energy cascades outward, light folding in upon itself, gravity twisting as the hive begins to implode inward, and Caden runs, dragging his ruined leg, through corridors that collapse and corridors that never existed, chased by the roar of a dying network and the fading echoes of a billion linked voices crying out in confusion. He does not reach the surface. The blast catches him somewhere between two realities, hurling him through layers of structure and void until he lands in darkness that hums faintly with residual power. Time ceases to mean anything. There is only pulse and breath, sometimes neither. When he finally opens his eyes, the world above has vanished, replaced by a ceiling of black glass that reflects nothing. He lies amid the remnants of machines melted into abstract shapes, his prosthesis fused solid, his body a ruin sustained only by stubborn will. For a long while he waits for death to complete what war and alien mercy began, but it does not come. Instead, from somewhere in the void around him, he hears movement, slow, deliberate, accompanied by the creak of servitor treads, and then a light shines across him, sterile and white, and a voice flat as memory declares, "Survivor detected. Reclamation protocol commencing." The light is not salvation, but inventory. A sterile beam from the sensor arrays of a Medici servitor that rolls closer on cracked treads, its lenses whirring as they adjust focus on the broken form before it. Caden tries to move, but his ruined prosthesis pins him in place, fused joints holding him to the floor like a chain of guilt. The servitor pauses, analyzing the wreckage of man and machine, its voximeter clicking through dialects before settling on the monotone cadence of Imperial Binharic translated speech. Designation unknown, genetic imprint Astra Militarum, vital signs present, injury classification, recoverable asset. The words strike him as both absurd and comforting, because recoverable implies belonging, implies there is still a ledger somewhere that counts him as part of the Imperium's arithmetic. He cannot scream when mechanical arms grip him, because his throat is dry and his mind echoes, only with the memory of the collective's voice now mercifully, absent but leaving silence like a wound. The servitor drags him through corridors that have forgotten how to stay solid, walls flexing and settling as if uncertain of their own reality. At times he sees other figures sealed into the structure, faces half emerged like bubbles trapped in amber, their expressions serene and horrifying in equal measure. The machine pays them no mind, following its protocol with blind precision, ignoring the spatial distortions that make the air ripple as though submerged. When they reach what must once have been an elevator shaft, the servitor deploys a winch line and descends, the chain groaning against unseen tension, and Caden hangs in its grasp like a specimen returned for study. Hours or days might pass during the descent. In the hive's warped temporal logic, the distinction has no meaning. When at last they emerge into a cavernous space illuminated by flickering lumen strips, he recognizes the architecture, Medici Station Delta 7 or a fragment of it, somehow preserved beneath the collapsing hive. The station is quieter now, half its wards empty, machines running on automated cycles long after their operators have perished. Dust lies thick over gurneys and diagnostic altars, yet the sacred symbols etched into the walls remain untouched, their sigils glowing faintly with residual power. The servitor deposits him onto an examination table, clamps engaging with a hiss, and begins its mechanical litany of triage, scanning the graft points, assessing biological viability, noting contamination readings it cannot interpret. "Foreign data detected," it announces flatly. "Pattern unrecognized. Isolation protocol engaged." For a moment, Caden's fear returns. If the alien code still lingers within him, the servitor may purge him as corrupted matter, but the machine hesitates. Its logic looped between conflicting directives: preserve Imperial property or destroy infection. Sparks leap from its augmetic limbs as it attempts to reconcile orders older than itself, and finally it defaults to inaction, freezing mid-motion like a statue caught between prayers. Caden seizes the moment. With shaking hands, he tears free the remains of his melted prosthesis, snapping connections that still spark against exposed flesh. Pain blooms but brings clarity. He throws the fused limb aside, the clang echoing across the empty ward. For the first time since Ferric Thule, he is purely organic again, or what passes for it after so much modification, and the realization feels both liberating and terrifying. He stumbles from the table, dragging himself toward a supply rack where surgical tools hang in neat disarray, many rusted, others gleaming with impossible cleanliness. Among them he finds what he needs: a standard-issue field crutch and a vial of combat stim sealed under Mechanicus sigil. He cracks the seal and injects the burning liquid into his vein, feeling his heartbeat accelerate until the world sharpens into pain and purpose. The servitor remains locked in its logic paralysis behind him, whispering half-finished code fragments like a dying priest reciting scripture to an empty church. He limps deeper into the Medici complex, guided by instinct and the faint hum of power conduits still alive somewhere within the ruins. Every corridor he passes shows evidence of partial reconstruction, as though the facility has been repeatedly patched by machines with no understanding of human ergonomics. Walls are thicker in some places, door frames narrowed to slits, ceiling supports fused into asymmetrical webs. He finds the main triage hall where he once lay under scanning light, now transformed into a cathedral of malfunctioning equipment. Monitors display cascading streams of data, looping endlessly through records of the dead. Names scroll past, thousands of them, soldiers catalogued by injury type, reassignment and eventual status. Among them he sees his own designation: Reese Caden, Track Secundus, reassigned 12th Veteran Company, status, missing in action. The machine has already written his epitaph. He stares until the screen flickers and resets, erasing the record entirely as if the system has finally accepted his absence. In a far corner of the hall, an intact terminal blinks amber. The symbol of the Adeptus Mechanicus pulses above it, half-lit, its cogwheel halo fractured but still turning. Caden approaches, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and need. When he activates the console, a flicker of static resolves into the visage of a robed Magos, its voice encoded in vox distortion, but intelligible enough to freeze his breath. Servitor Relay Network reports contamination at Hive Volturn. Initiating quarantine protocol. No response from veteran detachment. Genetic salvage authorized. Remaining assets to be processed for reintegration. The message repeats, looping endlessly. Reintegration. He hears the word and feels its weight shift from bureaucratic to existential. To the Mechanicus, reintegration means reclamation of useful components from the dead. To the alien intelligence, it meant absorption of minds into a unified whole. Between those definitions, he wonders if there is any difference left. The thought unsettles him more than the ruins. He moves on, deeper into maintenance tunnels where the scent of ozone thickens. The stim keeps him upright, pushing his nerves toward collapse. In the darkness, he begins to hear echoes, soft rhythmic clicks like Auspex pulses, distant and regular. He follows the sound until the corridor opens into a wide chamber filled with stasis pods, hundreds of them arranged in concentric circles. Many are shattered, their contents reduced to ash, but some still function, mist curling around their seals. He limps closer to one of the intact units and peers through the frost. Inside lies a figure in Medici whites, features peaceful, eyes closed. The face is familiar. Chirurgeon Major Sorella Kest, the surgeon who had taken his leg and given him the prosthesis that doomed him. She appears untouched by time, her flesh pale beneath the glass, her augmetic eye dark. A small plaque below the pod reads, "Preserved for consultation, Operational Directive Delta Prime." A voice breaks the silence. Not human, not mechanical, but something balanced perfectly between the two. Consultation available. Specify query. The sound emanates from the pod's speaker grill, calm and immediate, as though the occupant were awake behind the glass. Caden steps back instinctively, but the system repeats itself. Consultation available. Specify query. He hesitates, then finds words. How do you stop infection of augmented systems by external consciousness? There is a pause, a hiss of repressurization, and then the voice responds. Infection of machine psyche by foreign will is treated by excision of interface and cleansing with sanctified code. Organic elements are expendable. Machine must be preserved. Confirm execution. The cold logic of the Mechanicus in one sentence: flesh is a vessel, metal is truth. He realizes that if this system were fully active, it would destroy him instantly as contamination. But it is running on ghost power, unable to act beyond speech, and he wonders if it can still be reasoned with. I purged the code, he tells the pod. I burned it out through my augments, but it's still out there in the hive, in the workers. What can stop it? The response comes slower this time, the tone almost reflective. Containment insufficient. Pattern replication likely. Only orbital cleansing ensures purity. Authorization. Adeptus Mechanicus or Inquisitorial command required. You are unauthorized. Recommend submission for purification. He laughs, a dry, cracked sound that feels alien in the sterile air. There's no one left to authorize anything. The pod does not answer. Its internal lights dim, the faint hum of power subsiding. For a moment he thinks the system has shut down, but then the voice returns quieter. If you are uncorrupted, you are anomaly. Anomalies must be recorded. Proceed to transmission tower and deliver data to orbit. The Omnissiah must know. The final words echo like benediction before the chamber falls silent again, leaving only the slow drip of condensation from the ceiling. The directive gives him purpose. Transmission tower, an old Vox relay somewhere above if the hive structure still holds. He scavenges what he can. A portable Auspex, half a ration of stim, a bundle of power cells that might fit a transmitter. The climb through the tunnels is endless. More than once he encounters moving shadows that resolve into other servitors, each damaged in unique and terrible ways. Their programming reduced to loops of repetitive action, one endlessly cleaning a floor that no longer exists, another chanting surgical prayers while dissecting air. They ignore him, their world constrained to the boundaries of their malfunction. The higher he climbs, the louder the background hum grows, a reminder that somewhere above the alien network still breathes through its enslaved population. Yet he also senses interference, a rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat out of sync with the rest, perhaps the residue of his purge still corrupting the collective pattern. He imagines it as infection within infection, a wound he delivered to the wound that birthed him. At last he emerges into the upper levels, where shattered skylights reveal a sky not black, but shimmering with faint auroras, the warp bleeding through thin membranes of reality. The Vox Tower stands in the center of a collapsed plaza, its spire bent but still upright, arrays sparking intermittently. Around its base lie hundreds of motionless figures, former workers or soldiers, their bodies desiccated, faces locked in the same placid expression of those who served the alien will. Caden picks his way through them, the air thick with the electric tang of ozone and dust. When he reaches the tower's access hatch, the door refuses to open until he forces it with a length of rebar. Inside, the console glows weakly. He connects the Auspex and watches its display scroll through broken frequency bands. Nothing stable remains of Imperial communication. The stars themselves seem to hiss interference into the spectrum. Still he begins to broadcast, the old guard emergency code over and over, embedding within it the diagnostic logs from his purge. Hours pass. He does not know if anyone listens. The stim fades, leaving exhaustion that feels almost peaceful. Outside, the auroras intensify, turning the air to liquid color. Through the tower's fractured glass, he sees movement in the distance. The workers again, or what's left of them, converging on the plaza with mechanical steadiness. The alien network has noticed his signal and is coming to silence it. He increases transmission power, overriding safety limits until smoke rises from the console. The tower hums like a giant tuning fork, vibrating at frequencies that make his teeth ache. The first of the gray figures reaches the base of the stairs, its eyes burning with cold light, and Caden raises his rifle for what he knows will be the last time. He fires in short, deliberate bursts, each shot accompanied by the voice of the Vox repeating his message into the void. Contamination confirmed. Hive Volturn lost. Threat systemic. Request exterminatus authorization. As the last power cell empties, the horde continues climbing, unfazed by wounds, bodies moving in perfect rhythm toward him. The console erupts in sparks. The transmission stutters but continues. Caden backs against the railing, feeling the structure shudder beneath the combined weight of the approaching throng. Above, a crack opens in the clouds, impossible, blinding, shaped like the lens of a vast eye gazing down. For an instant he thinks he sees something move within that light, a silhouette vast as a continent, shifting in awareness. Then the world becomes white sound, a flood of static swallowing every color and every thought, leaving nothing but the echo of a signal, still repeating somewhere far above the dying hive. When the sound returns, It is not the roar of the hive collapsing, but the measured clatter of metal limbs striking ferrocrete. Caden opens his eyes to find the world tinted by pale lumen glow. The air tastes of disinfectant and ash. Around him stretch rows of machines, some alive, some dormant, forming a labyrinth of medici pods connected by fluid tubes and humming conduits. Above the noise, the same monotone voice that had found him earlier repeats its verdict with ritual precision. Subject secured. Biological integrity at 42%. Authorization for reclamation granted. He realizes he is no longer on the surface, but in some sub-level of the station, a place where damaged things are catalogued rather than healed. His arms are strapped against a gurney. The restraints are clean, new. Someone has been maintaining this place long after the rest of the hive died. From the corner of the chamber, a figure steps into view. A tech priest draped in red robes faded almost to brown, his face half skull, half machine. Cables sprout from his spine like roots burrowing into the floor. His voice, when it emerges through the vocoder grill, carries both reverence and exhaustion. You are anomalous, guardsman. Organic tissue yet unclaimed by the pattern. Augmentation self-terminated, but cognitive signature remains stable. You resisted the integration. He circles the gurney, optical implants scanning with a low whine. Your data will serve the Omnissiah's design. Caden forces words past his cracked lips. Everyone else, gone. The Magos inclines his head slightly, mechanical fingers twitching as though adjusting invisible instruments. Correct. Hive Volturn has achieved final equilibrium. Only you remain, proof that resistance, though statistically negligible, is possible. You will be dissected for understanding. The words ignite something in him. The will to live, which had become background noise amid endless survival, flares again. He strains against the restraints, but the Magos only watches, mildly interested. Unnecessary exertion, the priest murmurs. Your flesh will be preserved. Your thoughts, however, must be copied before termination. He gestures, and a servitor rolls forward bearing an array of neural spikes and cogitator leads, their edges slick with machine oil that smells faintly of incense. The sight tears through Caden's drug-blunted fear, replacing it with clarity. He has seen such instruments before, tools for memory extraction used on fallen psychers or heartechs. The process leaves the subject hollow. His only weapon is his voice. Magos, the infection, it's still active. If you connect me to your systems, it will spread. That's why I'm alive. The pattern failed to finish me. The priest pauses mid-motion, a dozen lenses focusing on him at once. For several long seconds, there is only the sound of distant machinery and the soft hiss of pneumatic vents. Then the Mago speaks again, slower. Verification required. He signals to the servitor, which pivots toward a secondary console and links its data spine. The screens bloom with static, followed by strings of corrupted code. Glyphs twist into impossible geometries. The same visual chaos Caden remembers from the shrine. The Magos emits a mechanical snarl. Unacceptable anomaly. Contagion persists within local noosphere. His hands begin to move faster now, sealing access ports, severing connections. You speak truth, guardsman. You are the vector. The pattern uses you as seed. His tone shifts from academic curiosity to something approaching panic. Containment protocols override dissection. The Omnissiah's domain must not be rewritten. The servitors respond instantly, sealing the chamber's doors and lowering isolation screens. Caden feels the restraints loosen. Not mercy, but process. The Magos is preparing to purge the entire room. Warning runes flash crimson across the walls. Purification in 90 seconds, drones a mechanical voice. Caden knows what that means. The release of purgation fire, plasma hot enough to erase matter and code alike. He tears free before the final lock engages, adrenaline overriding pain, and staggers toward the Magos, who stands frozen in calculation. If you purge this room, you'll destroy the only proof that it can be stopped, Caden shouts. You need to send the data out. The priest hesitates again. His algorithms conflict between obedience and curiosity. Then, with a movement almost human in its decisiveness, he unplugs one of the neural spikes from the apparatus and thrusts it into Caden's hand. Transmit this. Sector Command must know, go. The doors release with a hiss, and Caden limps into a corridor already filling with white smoke as the purge sequence begins. Behind him, the Magos turns back to his machines, chanting Binharic verses as the chamber ignites in incandescent flame. The heat follows Caden down the passage, searing his back even through torn armor. He stumbles into another shaft leading upward, the glow behind him flickering through vents like sunrise in reverse. The spike in his hand pulses faintly, alive with stolen data. He recognizes its shape, a portable data core capable of interfacing with any Imperial transmitter. If he can reach the surface again, he might send proof of the hive's fall beyond the planet before the alien contagion reasserts control. Above, the hive's skeletal framework groans as gravity shifts, the structure collapsing upon itself with the inevitability of prayer answered too late. Hours blur into instinct. He climbs through ventilation ducts and shattered lift shafts, dragging himself by one arm when the other fails. His thoughts come and go in fragments, echoes of the Magos' final words, flashes of the hive as it once was, the sound of his squad mates laughing before everything became metal and silence. Each memory feels stolen from a life that no longer belongs to him. At one point he passes a viewport cracked but intact enough to show the sky beyond. Ash clouds boiling in reverse, drawn upward toward a point of light where the aurora has condensed into a single burning wound in the atmosphere. Something massive is descending through it, perhaps a ship, perhaps something older. The sight pushes him onward. Whatever comes next, he refuses to let the last message of humanity in this hive die here among the ashes. He reaches the upper levels again by the time the stim in his veins begins to fade, replaced by exhaustion that feels almost tranquil. The corridors are familiar now, but wrong. Angles subtly changed, distances uncertain. At times he glimpses figures moving ahead of him, silhouettes of soldiers in perfect formation, but when he calls out, they dissolve into static, echoes of the collective's memory haunting the architecture. The data core in his hand grows warm, its internal spirit thrumming in resonance with the corrupted noosphere, still infecting the hive. He wonders if carrying it means carrying the infection anew, yet without it, there is no proof, no warning. The path narrows until he emerges into a vast chamber open to the poisoned sky, the same plaza where the transmission tower once stood. The spire is gone now, replaced by a crater glowing faintly blue, but around its rim stand the burned outlines of the grey workers, still upright, fused in place like statues carved from soot. At the crater's center something stirs, a column of light that shifts like liquid metal, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He senses the alien consciousness within it, diminished but alive, repairing itself through residual energy. The data core in his grasp hums louder, reacting as if aware of its maker. He understands then. The Magos' spike is not just a record but a weapon, a fragment of sanctified code designed to overwrite corruption with machine purity. The risk is clear. If he activates it here, it might erase both the alien presence and what remains of him. There will be no survivors, but perhaps that is the point. He limps toward the crater, each step slower as the radiation thickens and his vision tunnels, until he stands at the edge looking down into the shifting light that mirrors the shape of a human face for a heartbeat, before distorting into infinity. "You resisted," it whispers in countless overlapping voices. "You are ours and we are you." Caden does not answer. He drives the spike into the ground and twists until the runes along its length ignite. A sound like static made of prayers fills the air. The light recoils, folding upon itself as the code begins to spread. Amber symbols crawling across the crater walls like fireflies spelling liturgies. The alien voice screams in modulation, not of pain but disbelief, as the Mechanicus code consumes it line by line. Reality trembles, the sky cracking open once more. Caden feels the heat rise through his remaining flesh, the smell of burned ozone overwhelming every other sense. He braces himself against the edge of the crater, holding on only long enough to watch the impossible unfold. The hive unmaking itself, metal liquefying into rivers of light, the horizon bending as the code rewrites existence back into silence. For a fleeting instant, he thinks he hears the Emperor's name carried within the static, not as salvation but as recognition. Light consumes the sky, and for an immeasurable span there is nothing but radiance and pressure. A universe condensed into a single note too vast for human comprehension. When darkness returns, it is slow and heavy, the kind that presses against the skin like gravity. Caden Reese opens his eyes to see nothing recognizable. No hive, no crater, only an expanse of ash plains under a red horizon where lightning crawls without thunder. His breath fogs in air that smells of burnt metal and memory. Around him, fragments of structure jut from the ground like bones of a god long dead. The data core lies beside him, split open and inert, its inner mechanisms fused into glass. He does not know whether the alien presence is gone or merely dormant, but the silence feels honest in a way that nothing has for years. Every sound he makes is his own again. He begins to walk, dragging his ruined leg through dust that still glows faintly with residual radiation. Each step is an argument between body and will, yet motion feels necessary. The landscape stretches endlessly, scattered with shapes that might once have been men or machines. Some still stand upright, hollow silhouettes of ash preserved by the final blast. He passes them like gravestones without names. Somewhere above the aurora lingers, a wound in the sky refusing to close. When he looks too long, he sees faces in the light. His squad, the Magos, the workers, all dissolving back into brightness. He turns away and focuses on the horizon, on movement there, the faint silhouette of a shuttle descending through the static clouds, its engines muted. The insignia on its hull glints gold and black, an Inquisition seal, the mark of the Emperor's absolute judgment. Caden raises his arm in reflex, though he doubts the gesture will be seen. The craft circles, scanning the ground with piercing beams. When one of them lances across him, he expects vaporization, the usual fate of contaminated worlds. Instead, the shuttle slows, engines roaring against the poisoned wind, and descends until its landing struts sink into the ash near him. The ramp lowers with hydraulic groans, revealing figures in sealed armor bearing the twin-headed eagle and the sigil of the Ordo Malleus. Their weapons are ready but not raised. One steps forward, a woman's voice amplified through Vox filters. "Identify." Her tone is flat, procedural. Caden's voice comes out as a rasp. "Guardsman." "Reese, 47th Steelward. Hive Volturn gone." The interrogator studies him for a moment, then gestures to her adepts. "Contain him. Decontaminate. Secure the artifact." Inside the shuttle, everything smells of sanctified oil and ozone. They strip him of what remains of his armor, scan his flesh for infection, flood his veins with neutralizers that burn like ice. The interrogator watches without speaking, her expression unreadable behind her visor. When the tests return conflicting readings, neither pure nor corrupted, she leans closer, her voice quieter. "You are in contact with the entity. It is not a question." Caden nods. "I stopped it. Or slowed it. I don't know." The woman tilts her head as though listening to something distant. "No one ever stops such things, guardsman. We merely delay their turn of the wheel." She turns away, signaling to the pilot. "Prepare ascent. Quarantine orbit." Through the narrow viewport, the ash plains shrink beneath them, and he sees what remains of Hive Volturn, a blackened crater rimmed with glass, the faint glow at its heart finally fading. Hours later, the shuttle docks with a larger vessel in orbit. The transition from heat to cold is instant. The corridors inside are immaculate, lined with purity seals fluttering in recycled air. They bring him before another figure, a man in crimson robes, face half obscured by augmetic implants. The interrogator kneels slightly before him. "My Lord Inquisitor, survivor located. Genetic trace matches Imperial Guard records. Possible residual contamination." The Inquisitor studies Caden through lenses that click and refocus, then speaks in a voice that could belong to either flesh or machine. "The Mechanicus signal we received from the surface ended before completion. You were its source." Caden nods weakly. "And there was no one else." The Inquisitor's gaze lingers. "Then you are both witness and evidence. Your mind will serve the Emperor's record." He gestures toward a side chamber filled with suspended cables and glowing relics. "We will see what remains of your truth." They place him within a stasis cradle, electrodes biting into skin, neural threads sliding beneath the skull. The machine surrounding him hums with restrained divinity, a device meant to read souls through circuitry. The Inquisitor's voice echoes from somewhere beyond the light. This procedure will not harm you unless you are lying. Caden almost laughs at that, but lacks the strength. The world dissolves again, replaced by flickering imagery. Trenches on Ferric Thule, the Medici wards, the shrine, the alien geometry, each memory projected across cogitator screens. The observers watch in silence as the final scene unfolds. The activation of the data core, the implosion of light, the erasure of the hive. When it ends, the Inquisitor speaks softly, as though to himself. Exterminatus denied. Containment verified. Pattern disrupted. But at what cost? The cradle opens. Caden gasps air that feels too clean. His vision swims, but through the blur he sees the Inquisitor standing beside the interrogator, conferring in low tones. Words drift to him. Specimen, partial synchronization, potential immunity. Finally, the Inquisitor addresses him directly. Do you carry within you something unprecedented? The code that once sought to overwrite you now lies dormant in your neural lattice. It may be weaponized or it may awaken. Either outcome interests the Emperor's servants. He gestures, and the interrogator steps forward with a small injector. Sleep now, guardsman. When you wake, your service will continue in a new form. The needle bites his neck, cold spreading through veins like liquid glass. His last sight before consciousness fades is the viewport beyond the chamber. A view of Ferric Thule turning below, its clouds still marked by the faint scars of the battle he survived. When awareness returns once more, he is floating in nutrient suspension. The sensation is weightless, timeless. Machines whisper around him in a chorus of hissing valves and quiet data exchanges. For a moment he believes he is back in the collective's dream, but the voices here are singular, human whispering prayers of maintenance. A sigil glows above his tank. Project Saint-Sife, Initiate 01. He realizes dimly that he has been rewritten again. Not by alien design this time, but by imperial hands seeking to understand what he became. Perhaps he is cure, perhaps weapon. His reflection on the glass shows augmetics restored, new and pristine, eyes faintly luminous. Somewhere within his skull, beneath the layers of implants and memory ghosts, the silence of the hive still echoes, a reminder that mercy in the Imperium never ends. It only changes shape, and far below on the dead world's surface the ashes shift under unseen wind. The faintest hum returns to the crater where light once was, a heartbeat of code pulsing weakly, waiting, learning once more how to begin.